Good morning, everybody. I'll just give it a few minutes for people to join. Okay, so while we have people joining, I just want to welcome everybody to the session today, which is getting the most out of your data for engagement, recruitment and retention. My name is Joyce Harman and I'm a consultant with Hart, and I'm delighted to have with me today Marius from Blue Light CRM. Marius, if you'd like to quickly say hello.
Morning, everyone. How are you all doing? I'm Marius from Blue Light CRM, and I'll be talking to you about how to sort your data out. How does it all happen?
Perfect, thank you. And we have Alex from Pixelate.
Hi, my name's Alex Skinner. I'm one of the founders of Pixelate, and I'll be talking to you about the art of the possible with your data. So essentially, where can you push your data and how can you make it work for you?
Fantastic. And also we have Stuart from Pixelate. Stuart.
Hi, everybody. I'll be helping out with the Q&A today and just checking questions to and from Marius and Alex.
Brilliant, thank you. So just to go over some etiquette for this morning, so just to say that the session will be recorded. We would ask that if you have any questions, and we do encourage questions throughout the whole session, if you use the Q&A box for any content related questions, any questions for the panel today. If you have any technical problems at all, if you can use the chat box, that would be great, and my colleagues in the background will be able to help with anything of, like that. Also, just a note to say that all the microphones will be muted on the session as well. Just a really quick slide about Hart for those of you who don't know us. Just to say that we are a consultancy practice. We work only in the not-for-profit sector and carry out a number of different projects, everything from business cases to implementations. And I suppose the really important point is to say that, you know, we are fiercely independent of any technology or provider. So, you know, we know all the guys very well, but it's very important to, you know, to point out that we are independent. So really just for me to cover a few points on data around some of the things that we've been finding at Hart coming up in a lot of the meetings that we're having and the work that we're doing with our clients. And data is one of those topics that I have to be honest, I could talk about for hours, but data has never been more valuable than it is now with the way the world is at the minute with the COVID crisis. A lot of organizations are really struggling around issues to do with member retention. And also for a lot of charities are having a number of issues as well to do with supporter engagement. And all of this is having really large implications on funds for the organizations. And so having good data to be able to offer better engagement with all of those people is really, really key. What we often find that is a lot of people will focus a lot of their projects on looking at the tech and the sort of the transformation strategy, but really forgetting about the data. And although sort of data for some people isn't a very exciting topic, and it certainly isn't as exciting as getting a new piece of kit with lots of buttons and lots of nice workflows and things that can do lots of things, but if you do not have the underlying data put in a proper and managed way, you can spend an awful lot of time and money on a project, but you're not going to get the best out of it if the underlying data doesn't support it. Which also really comes down to putting together proper data plans, depending where you are, if you already have the tech, carrying out data audits, understanding what it is that you have, or if you're embarking on a new technology project, very much putting together a properly thought through data migration strategy and understanding the resources that you require in order to be able to do that. So there is an awful lot of challenges around data, which I know the guys are going to explore today, but it's not all doom and gloom, because obviously with data, good data can really enable an awful lot of positive things for an organization, particularly as saying earlier, the point around recruitment and retention of people, be they those supporters, or customers or members, being able to offer a much more personalized journey can really help with that, increased engagement levels and sort of that stickiness. Also, one of the challenges that we found a lot is organizations trying to make decisions around how to embark on their data strategy. Where should the money be invested? Because obviously, for a lot of organizations, budgets are a lot tighter than they would have been in the past. Not that, we know that budgets are generally tight across the sector, but particularly this year, it has been a struggle for a lot of organizations. So having proper data insights can really help you make those strategic decisions on where you should focus your time, what resources you need, and what you should do next. So there are just some really, really high level points from the things that we're finding with the clients that we're working at the minute. So now I'm just going to hand over to Alex. So Alex, over to you.
Give me 1 second.
No problem.
So hopefully you should be able to see my screen. So yeah, getting the most out of your data for engagement, recruitment and retention and other things, I suppose. So just a very, very quick introduction. Pixelate's been going for nearly 20 years. And this is our strapline. So your digital ambitions delivered and then some. I suppose for me, what that really means in a nutshell is how do we take our clients' ambitions and how do we exceed them, and how do we come across opportunities in their data, in their systems, in their processes to really push them on as an organization. As I said, we've been going for 20 years. We have a couple of hundred projects under our belt, possibly slightly more, and around 100 active membership association, charity, regulator clients. Everybody has one of these slides. So first of all, we obviously have the digital transformation buzzword, which is very, very apt at the moment, I suppose, especially during the COVID crisis. We're seeing a lot of organizations that have been historically quite conservative or quite slow to change, really, I suppose in some respects actually thriving on the need for change. So effectively change by necessity. We see a lot of digital projects. We do a lot of projects every year, and for me, this is a really handy slide from Forrester, which shows the difference between digital as a tack-on to the rest of the organization. It's not really embedded, through sort of transformative change versus actually disruption. Now, I would suggest that most of the organizations we work with are quite digitally transformative in the projects that they do. Transformative or sort of disruptive is I suppose where the business model fundamentally changes as a result of the introduction of digital, which is certainly something to aspire to. Before we get going, I think in terms of understanding, a little bit of introspection, understanding where you are as an organization can be very, very helpful when it comes to how ambitious a project you take on. All the way from sort of, all change, major shake-up, new senior leadership or other compelling event that means we need to introduce digital change, aspirational organizations that are smaller and have gone 100% digital, people like the Global Certification Forum that we work with that does all mobile phone certification globally, very small team, 100% digital by necessity. Through to digitally hesitant, I've got fear of missing out, our competitors are doing something, and my sort of catchphrase of sort of digitally damaged, which is ultimately organizations that have had a series of failed projects, which means that when they start doing a new project, sometimes their reaction is positive from a perspective of they know what bad looks like. So when they start seeing some good implementation, that's positive and there's lots of enthusiasm. But sometimes digital damage can lead to lots of hesitancy and that kind of thing. So I think understanding where you are as an organization, or where individual team members sometimes are on this sort of spectrum, can be quite helpful. So what is personalization? So personalization for me is a pretty hot topic in the sense of we have lots of different members, lots of different member needs, and we'd like to be able to talk to them in a very personal way. I'm going to show some examples of what we might not consider to be personalization, but ultimately they are. So this is from Google Calendar. In this particular instance here, we've got some creative that's being applied automatically when it detects that I'm going to the dentist, and it applies a graphic here. But it's very important when we're using sort of programmatic creative design to have empathy, because if you imagine I was going to a funeral and they put a different picture there, it might not go so well in terms of applying things. So it's important to do things because they add value, not just because you can. So what makes personalization happen? So traditionally speaking, we'd have segmentation where we segment people up into different groups. We'd have customization where a user might choose their favorites. They might adapt their experience by virtue of adding some favorites to a board. And then we have personalization where we're using data that we know to try and serve you up a more customized experience. Now, I think it's important to look at personalization versus pigeonholing. So personalization adds value in terms of, adding clever functionality that allows me to surface things that are of interest to you based on the preferences or what I know about you. But pigeonholing shouldn't come in where we start treating everybody as the same just by virtue of the fact that they're a long-term member. Doesn't mean we don't show content that is of relevance to new members, because quite often our advocates are equally interested in new member content as they would be in content that's been around for much longer. So why would we use personalization? So ultimately, it helps with engagement in terms of giving people the right information at the right time. We know that members that don't engage, that don't take our member benefits, are less likely to retain. So certainly understanding what the aims are of membership in terms of what people want to get from membership, perhaps some of the soft questions, allow us to nudge people to certain outcomes. If somebody hasn't logged into the website in more than a month, then we might flag something on the CRM to say, we're going to reach out to this member and make sure and do an onboarding call. Or we might send an email to the member to tell them of all the interesting things that have happened on the website since last time that they visited. So there's a number of different reasons why giving somebody a personalized experience gives certain benefits. So different members with different needs. So I think it's very important when we're talking about building up a picture of our members to think about them not just as associates or fellows or committee members or people that are lapsed or people that are in a retired status, which is the temptation when we start being driven by data, but rather where they are on a sort of a journey. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a loyalty ladder in a minute, where we sort of map things out and think about where our members are on that journey. And the reason why it's particularly important to think about this is where technology can turn our members off and really have a negative impact on their experience. So as an example of that, if we pick one of these as an example, long-standing member who does nothing. Sometimes it gets to the point where if somebody has renewed year on year on year on year, their behavior hasn't materially changed, then nudging them or nagging them to say, it doesn't look like you're attending our events, or it doesn't look like you're logging into the website, could actually have the opposite effect. So another good example of this in terms of thinking of people as individuals and where they are on the journey is we had an example with National History Museum. So the National History Museum had an issue where they would announce these free events, and then ultimately all of the long-term members would jump on and book everything up. And the issue with that is that some of the less aware members in terms of member benefits, the new members were not getting in there first. So, one of the tactics that was employed there was holding back a certain proportion of ticket availability based on the profile of the member. So holding back a certain proportion of ticket availability for new members. Obviously, technically quite easy to do, just looking at the member join date, but beneficial in the sense of it started to actually, allow the new members to start to understand the benefits and become more advocates. Let's have a look at a planning framework. So in this particular case here, we've got a personalisation planning framework. I'm going to whiz through this at a rate of knots. These slides will be available with my notes as well, so we can pick those up in a bit. So identifying the data opportunities, obviously CRM is center of the universe. This will please Marios. So CRM has to be center of the universe. It has to be center of your thinking. We need to take CRM data. We need to build a rich profile of CRM data. We need to make that available to the digital platform. We then need to augment that with data from other sources, Google Analytics, survey information, email interaction data. And we don't want to, I'm going to talk a little bit about systems in a minute. We don't want to just wire our systems together in a sort of forms posting to CRM. We need to build a body of data that's available to the digital platform to really sort of get the secret sauce. So in this particular case here, we've got interests, we've got activity, CPD information, we've got some personal details coming from CRM. So this is sort of the typical sources of data that we might have available to us. And then we might actually have some other data available as well. So we might have some geospatial data. We might have information specifically related to quizzes. Machine learning, you don't need AI, just to put that out there. So I think AI is a very interesting and exciting topic, and people would love Bitcoin and VR headsets and augmented reality as well, as sure, on their websites if they can. But coming back to something Joyce mentioned earlier, getting your data sorted and investing in your data and planning the data and, getting the sort of the baseline there before you start looking at these sort of clever tools is really the aim of the game. So looking at this particular example here, so we have non-members. We can identify that by virtue of the fact they're not logged in, or it could be that they've responded to a campaign that was specifically targeted at non-members. And we might have a goal to increase membership applications, and then we can have a strategy around that as well. Existing student members, we know that by virtue of the fact that they're logged in. One of the challenges specifically with membership organizations is this compulsion with creating a members area rather than treating a membership as a layer of the site that people bump into. Because one of the challenges of sort of the traditional members area is the fact that people only go into the members area and they only log in if there's some kind of transactional activity that they need to undertake, maintaining a profile or updating self-service information. And one of the tactics that we can employ by sort of having a traditional paywall where people are browsing through the site and they're nudged or reminded or given some value for logging in is that it makes all this stuff much easier. A lot of the assumption of logging in otherwise goes out the window. So in this particular case here, we can see that we've got a segment of non-member. We've got an alert to sign up to newsletter registration. An existing student member could get a geolocated events banner, and a soon to lapse associate member could get a renewal reminder. So essentially it can be nudges through alerts. We can make it easier by surfacing sort of relevant information. Or we might do some cross-selling. One of the things that I like the idea of is sort of creating almost like a digital concierge. So when you go to a great hotel that you've been to a number of times before, a concierge might know what you like to drink in my case, or they might like to know the activities or events that you might like to go to. And they build up a profile of you as a customer and are able to recommend things to you when you're in town. Now, when it comes to the website or the digital platform, for me, it's about using technology to surface things based upon what we know about you in a way that kind of creates a degree of delight, I suppose, in terms of the experience. So it's these sort of micro interactions that leave you with that sort of impression of, well, that's just nice, rather than it just being a bit creepy. So I think, you know, there's a fine line between personalization when it adds value versus being a bit creepy. So in this particular example here, we've got you know, wireframes with sort of personalized zones. This is quite a typical way of working with data, having some particular zones. This is quite basic, and I think it's kind of like personalization 101. For me, most digital platforms now should have the capability to really drop personalized elements in anywhere. So it shouldn't just be a case of there's some little place on the page where we can, you know, we can change the links or things like that. I'm really talking about across every single platform. So when we're sending an email and we're in our email newsletter, we've got our conference coming up. And you've already booked, I don't think it sends a good impression to say, will you be coming to conference, or please come to conference. And in fact, we're wasting the real estate of our newsletter by virtue of the fact that we've plastered that over the top. Much better to acknowledge their attendance, say, you know, so pleased you're coming to conference, you know, remember that you can sign up for these added benefits, or indeed if they attended conference last year to say, will we be welcoming you back to conference again this year? Again, it's a subtlety, but it creates a really positive feeling. I'm going to skip over these slides because I've got lots more, and these will be available in the deck. So just a few watch outs on the personalization side of things. Blindly trusting technology or blindly trusting your data. I think you can't underestimate the value of data in a technology platform. And actually, if we look at the sort of issues that clients will have, the vast majority of the time when you talk to them, they will say, well, of course our email addresses are unique, or yes, we have, you know, opt-in information for all of this stuff. But when you actually dig for data and you actually look at it, you'll find that quite often the data doesn't match the rhetoric. So it's very important to build a central view of data, and ultimately based upon that we can activate the functionality. We have this ladder of loyalty where we can you know, map out where somebody is on their cycle. And it's very, very important to when you're doing tracking to look at macro conversions and micro conversions. There is a temptation to focus on the macro, so things like key events like upgrade or join online or obviously cancellation. But these things don't happen very often comparative to sort of the micro interactions, or as my colleague Lucy would say, the clues. So sometimes it's important to have a combination of micro interaction tracking as well, because those things are sometimes the more useful clues. So from a system standpoint, and then I'm going to hand over to Marios, from a system standpoint, do not integrate like this. There is a temptation to get everything talking to everything and wire up our systems in this kind of mesh of data. It's very important to create a central platform, and that's usually the CRM, or in the case of our platform, it's quite often the CDP that we have within our digital platform. And it's very important when you're wiring systems up to create a body of data, but also to use technologies like message queues and data sync to ensure that we don't end up with data going off into the ether. What we see an awful lot of the time, especially with some very popular common platforms, is because they're easy to integrate with. People just attempted just to wire them up, you know, get some web services and APIs and other buzzwords flying around. And they don't put the time in place to actually make things robust. So they're not putting in place the message queues, the sort of the synchronization frameworks and things like that. And this is my last slide. So essentially, when you when you get a great platform together and you build up a rich platform, then you can use systems like rules engines to allow us to build quite complicated rules, or sorry, complex rather than complicated, to drive the experience. So that can be things like, if the user hasn't opened the last 3 emails that we've sent them, then the next time they come to the site, we're going to nudge them and we're going to say, it doesn't look like you're getting our email. You know, make sure your email address is up to date. Or if the user that has come to the site hasn't gone and visited the groups section and they're a committee member, then nudge them, you know, give them an important message to say, you know, go and download your committee papers. That's it from me. Over to Stuart, I believe.
Thanks very much, Alex. So we've got some questions that have come in for you, following that, and thank you very much indeed for going through that with us. So in terms of data, it is, people see it and think it's a huge project to actually begin with. Where do we start with data? And everybody's resources are very stretched at the moment. So one of the questions is, what skills do you need in-house to manage your data? And should you have a dedicated data manager?
I'm going to be talking about sort of roles, responsibilities, data governance, that sort of thing in a more general sense in my presentation. But go ahead, Alex, if you want to kind of tackle that.
Yeah, so I think there's a difference between somebody that has accountability for it versus having a role. I think there's a temptation to say we're going to hire a role for this and a role for that, and that would be a nice way of thinking about it. But when we talk about subject matter experts, the events team are the experts on event data. The membership team are the experts when it comes to all things membership, and so on and so forth, to the point where I think it's important to have a data strategy. I think it's important for it to be a you know, a board level layer of accountability in terms of, you know, and that's been true for a while, right? That was the great thing about GDPR. I like GDPR. I think GDPR was a good thing. I want to get that out there, you know, and not because of some of the rules and how they were implemented, but it got the conversations around data into the boardroom, and it made people think about their responsibilities and looking after their data. So I don't think.
Sorry, no, go on. I was going to say that is a good lead on to another question, really, in terms of, does regulation prevent data extraction and use, and what are the challenges for actually creating for using that data correctly that you've experienced?
I think regulation certainly doesn't do that for you. It provides a framework, but ultimately it's your own processes, structures, data governance, roles, responsibilities really that will implement that. So in itself, regulation allows you to at least have a bit of a big stick to you know, to be able to kind of push the conversation in certain areas, but not in itself implement it in your organization.
And I think also the problem explicitly with GDPR was some of the vagaries around things. So, you know, if you take, for example, a very well-known large membership association with, you know, houses and other venues that you could go and visit. I got a letter through the post that said, you know, if you don't click here, or if you don't visit this site and opt in, we can't communicate with you anymore, which is just such poor advice in terms of, you know, clearly people got advice around GDPR from either the sort of accountancy practices and the lawyers, which went for a very, very kind of no nonsense, thou shalt just give up and stop communicating approach, through to sort of more I guess more sector specific experts or consultants that really took a pragmatic view. And then, you know, you saw a blend of sort of legitimate interest and consent being used. So I don't think GDPR is the problem. I think, you know, ultimately if people behaved properly, if people behaved ethically with data, then GDPR wouldn't have been necessary in the first place. But yeah.
Okay, excellent. So there's one more. I'll just scroll up one minute. Is engagement scoring a useful tool?
That's an interesting one. I mean, a classic question we have as part of any CRM implementation is, can your CRM do engagement scoring? The answer is, of course. The next question is, what do you define as engagement? And what exactly are you going to do with it? So again, I think I've got some sort of clear objectives.
Is it more a chicken and egg kind of question, really, isn't it?
I'm not sure that it is. And again, I'm going to be sort of tackling kind of strategy to data kind of alignment. And ultimately, you've got to set out your objectives, for it before you then start tracking it, rather than, start tracking and see what happens.
The engagement scoring in a lot of CRMs is kind of, I guess, flawed in the sense that it's kind of signal based. So attending an event means this, downloading a document means that, renewing or doing X means Y. And the problem is, it's the same as some of the sort of more crude personalization functionality in systems that have come out of the e-commerce space, where if I'm clicking on certain things or if I'm downloading certain things, that it's applying a degree of scoring or signals to me that builds up a profile. So the sort of the implicit versus explicit personalization. But the problem is, am I interested or am I just lost? So, if I'm clicking around on a dozen different things. So I think the explicit personalization, or if you have a sort of implicit behavior or an implicit signal, then rather than taking that signal as read, it might encourage you to actually ask the question in a more overt way, to say, actually, are you interested in this? If you are, go to our profile and explicitly opt into this interest, as a sort of a double validation, rather than just sort of using implied behavior to mean something, which I think can be dangerous. So we've got some more questions coming in.
We have, but I think what we've got 3 questions that probably will come out from Maris's presentation. So we don't want to run out of time. So to give you proper time for your presentation, Maris, if we want to start, you okay for that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. And then we'll cover the other questions afterwards.
Good stuff.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Alex. Hopefully you can see my screen. Good stuff. So my laptop has finally woken up. Right, so just a little bit of introduction about us and myself personally. We're a not-for-profit sector specialist. I mean, membership, trade associations, charities, institutes, societies are pretty much what we do. We provide best-in-class products and specialize in all things Microsoft, particularly Dynamics 365 CRM. We've provided product and services to the NFP sector for close to 20 years in one form or another. And we certainly have deep technical knowledge and data and integration are very much specialities. About myself, I've been around the block a little while, seen projects, data, technology transformation in one way or another for a couple of decades. So there's not much that I haven't seen throughout that time. Key themes today, we're just going to talk a little bit about data strategy, digital transformation, very little of that, data migration in particular, and change management. Really, how do they fit together? Do they fit together in any way? As we've probably heard, gathering data today helps to better understand your customers and businesses. It's a relatively easy thing to do. In fact, it's become so easy, there's really a danger of having too much data to deal with, and that's something we see all of the time. But to take full advantage of data analytics, you need to know how to get the most value from it, what it is that you're wanting to do with it. But does it really matter? I mean, surely if a member is interested or wants something, they'll ask for it, maybe, but then maybe not. Data, of course, helps you make better decisions. Using data the right way, organizations can harness data to make decisions about potentially finding new customers, increasing customer retention, improving customer service, tracking social media interactions, predicting trends, all of that good stuff. It helps you improve processes, of course, helps you understand your processes so you can reduce wasted money and time. without data, really, you don't really know that much about your customers, about your members, your stakeholders. Data is absolutely key in understanding your customers and your market. But how do you harness the power of data in the best way to achieve your goals? There are a number of different things that will go into making up your data strategy. Roadmap development, data use cases, business alignment and strategic alignment implementation, data maturity assessments of your organization, data governance, of course, that we'll talk about in a little bit more detail, as well as a clear business case behind all of this. Do we have the correct data available? Do we have the right quality? What can we do to improve it? Do we have the right data knowledge? Do we have the right ownership in the organization? What are quick wins for us and what's going to likely take a little bit longer? And of course, do we have the right skill sets? Are we able to transform our business to be better enabled by that data and insight? We talked a little bit more about having the right people. We'll talk a little bit more about roles and responsibilities and a data governance framework. But do we have the right culture? Do we have a data culture internally? What's the operating model that we need to work towards? How do we get everybody behind it? And of course, how do we empower change through that? What are the optimum models to form from our data and understand examples around engagement, value, churn, all of those things that we've been talking about. I mean, this is a typical model really of data migrations that we've seen over the years, still do all the time. How it's usually done, you kind of take what you currently have, take everything because you might need it, jam it in as best you can. Then what I'm expecting out of my new CRM is personalisation, segmentation, historical and trends analysis. So to give me key insights, but what key insights? Really what you should be doing prior to any sort of data transformation, data migration, is you need some key inputs around access to data sources and historical data, of course, database copies, structured file extracts, whatever they might be, any documentation behind them, you know, any sort of data dictionaries, anything that will give us a little bit more context. Do we have defined business objectives, strategic, KPIs? Do we know what the existing challenges are that we want to solve? Do we have a change program in place already? And how does this fit into it? And what is our existing user base roles and responsibilities around data? Do we have descriptions? Do we have organizational charts and roles and responsibilities? This is pretty much how it should be done. Obviously, the perfect world, you would have full strategic alignment. It will be very much objective focused. There will be a post-transformation focus to make sure, of course, that anything that's been embedded stays embedded. There needs to be a big piece around change management and data governance, absolutely. There is quite a lot there. It isn't just about moving and cleaning data. Of course, these models might sound like a lot, but really there are some sort of simple structures, simple methods and models that you can use. A framework for data migrations. It's a very simple or simplistic model, I suppose, that I'm showing. You need to ensure that your data strategy exists and is part of your plans. It's got to be recognized. Review your data sources, make sure they're accurate, recent, useful, appropriate, bit of an analysis on that. Before you even get into the sort of the data architecture and mapping across to your new system. It doesn't need to be onerous, but you should at least think about it and make sure it's part of your change plans. Some of those elements broken down a little bit more. Why do we want to align to strategy and objectives? It's just data, right? Well, having strategic alignment allows for a clear vision to exist and can be communicated at least to all concerned. It allows everyone to align behind it. It allows very clear objectives to be defined and communicated, as well as some specific KPIs that we're looking for. But it also forces and formalizes senior level support as part of the whole process. It's essential that you have a data governance framework. Again, it doesn't have to be onerous, but it at least needs to be thought about with some of these key elements. It also allows it to be brought into an overall delivery or program governance structure. It's not just a standalone governance framework. Ideally, really, it needs to be part of any digital transformation, technology, migration, to make sure that it's given the appropriate priority. It'll ensure adoption of key principles and data ownership, both as part of the implementation, but most definitely going forward. It's recommended that the data governance structure is clear and understood, and it's formally introduced to the overall project governance structure. As a minimum, really, you should be looking at roles and responsibilities, security and access, data quality, and of course, all the compliance aspect around that. Again, a bit of a buzzword, a bit of a buzz term, 360 view. Is it really realistic? Well, not often, but is it even a good target to aim for? A legacy CRM by definition, which is not deemed fit for purpose and it's not integrated with the web, will typically start to fragment, resulting in very different sort of data silos. That means you've got disparate systems, varying quality, but most importantly, you've got different owners and different priorities. And how do you kind of bring that all together into a 360 view? For a new CRM, we at least need to know what we're aiming for. Everyone wants to check engagement, but do we know what we're tracking and why? So a 360 view sounds good, but how does that align with your objectives? A simple framework to be undertaken prior to any major data migration project in being able to sort of bring together that 360 view is at least define the perfect view. Be bold, but make sure it kind of makes sense and it aligns with your objectives. Map that to your current data sources to allow a good high-level view. Align current data owners to get acceptance and adoption as part of that. Be completely honest about the gaps. You're not going to have all of it. And prioritize, obviously, how and when these will be filled. And then define a realistic perfect view, which is aligned with your strategy. So in very simple terms, you understand where the data is coming from, who owns the data, you've analyzed it, you've defined how risky, clean, or otherwise it might be, and then you prioritized it based on that, on those particular metrics to ensure that if it doesn't come in straight away, will it come in at a later stage, or is it a gap, and do we need to be able to collect it through a system or another? Good question always comes up is which data sources do we actually bring in to a new CRM? Now, I suppose the classic balancing act is prioritization. You've obviously got finite budget, time, resources to be able to sort of bring across data as part of any data migration. But if you deprioritize, think about it, I suppose, from a data owner's perspective. Unless there's a clear program to bring across kind of what they might term their data, then it's unlikely they're going to adopt new systems or ways of working. So the mapping exercise we looked at earlier should hopefully help you define precisely what that migration phasing looks like, and to make sure you've got that adoption, that engagement from all concerned. And finally, a little bit about change management. I suppose this isn't intended as a change management presentation, but it's absolutely key for any change, particularly around data. Do we have senior level support? Have we defined those change agents, those key users that are going to support this going forward? Is there very much a case for change? Are we able to communicate and listen in terms of that? And is there any sort of training and development to support everyone that's involved? I mean, it's very much all about the basics in terms of communicating it. You know, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? How are you involved? How are we going to support you as part of the process? And is it you know, good, honest, consistent, organized, two-way communications, or is it just simply lip service to a particular process? Around senior level support, it's absolutely essential. Is the vision clear? Can it be described simply? Is it compelling? Is it real and consistent? Have the senior management team actually bought in? Are they committed and accountable? Will they actually persist throughout the process? And are they going to be visible throughout the process? And will they help reinforce messaging at key stages? Those key users, change agents, we do need a formal group, a forum. They do need to be influential. They do need to at least look at it from a positive perspective and sort of drive, sort of identify, tackle challenges as they go through that. In terms of making the case for change, is it a burning platform that we have at the moment? Are there any real alternatives? Why are we doing it now? Can the journey be described accurately, honestly? What's your involvement going to be, and when does it end? I mean, the right answer to that is never really. I mean, it's very much an ongoing process. In terms of communication, do you have a comms plan? Is it prepared and verified? Does it have any gaps to avoid? Obviously, that's where misinformation and gossip might start. Is it consistent, simple, and are you doing what you're promising? And of course, is it honest? And are we able to identify challenges and also celebrate successes as part of that? And are we open to the communications loop? Are we allowing for a forum to be able to feedback, to be able to respond and enable any concerns to be addressed, rather than having any sort of misinformation or gossip? And of course, training and development, not just in technology. We're talking about based on the role, whether that is regulatory, whether that is personal development in terms of being able to handle change, to lead change, before you even get into the technology aspects, and are we formalizing this? Are we actually making sure that this is perhaps embedded in those key users' personal development plans, so that it can be formally recognized as part of any change project? Thank you very much. I think that's it for the moment.
Thank you, Marius. We've got some really interesting questions coming up for that. First of all, you mentioned about different owners and having different priorities. But one of the questions asks, where does an organization start?
They start? Well, in terms of the, as part of any change process around data, as mentioned, the model is, it's really in being completely honest and kind of getting together. I mean, you're going to have to decide on your objectives for data. What is it that we're trying to do with it? You're then going to have to look at what's the perfect scenario in terms of what's that 360 view, our perfect customer view look like. You then look at, realistically, what data do I have available? How clean, recent, is it? And you also start to sort of map this across to say, well, this is where we want to be. This is how far we need to get to. And these are the people that are going to help us make that happen. As I said, I mean, as part of, legacy CRMs, a classic example is where they're implemented, and then what will happen is you'll find that it kind of almost, the user base shrinks to usually membership finance. Everybody else goes off and buys a third-party platform because it's online, it can do a lot more, but then you've got that fragmentation of data. Now, they're all very, very, they'll see their data as very important, gives them insights in terms of who to invite, who's going to rejoin, so on and so forth. And obviously the concept of kind of bringing all this stuff into a single CRM will scare everybody. So being able to sit down, map all of this, it doesn't have to be a massive exercise, just literally a case of being honest about what do we have, what do we need, how are we going to get there.
And sometimes the data also isn't the biggest fire. Sometimes if you have, it's important, I guess, to acknowledge that in some organizations data silos are okay. So if you've got two very distinct parts of the business that don't really cross over, we talk about kind of creating that unified view, but sometimes there might be bigger fires, there might be bigger areas of inefficiency. Sometimes it makes more sense to, when you're implementing a system, is to not perpetuate the processes and sort of habits that have occurred over time, but to sort of use the change process that you're going through to identify the biggest wins in terms of, the automation of a process can actually ultimately result in better data. So therefore, sometimes you might do it around the other way. You might say, okay, well, we're going to get everything automated. We're going to cut out some of these sort of manual and error-prone processes in order to improve our data gradually over time. Then we're going to do our overall data audit. Then we're going to try and iterate over it.
That's a good point, because is it worth putting time into a data audit? So if you've worked out your objectives, you know what you're going to do, but you've got your data, all this data here that you're trying to put into one, like your diagram, Marius, when you're putting it all in the top of the funnel and trying to get out into your new CRM, is it worth doing the digital audit before then, or is it worth putting it all into one system and then doing the digital audit when you've got it in one place?
It's very important.
Yeah, sorry, Carl, Alex, you start.
I was going to say it's very important to do the digital audit and to understand the quality of your data before you start using that data to activate any kind of comms or any kind of communications, especially present company excluded, of course, Stuart, but if you've ever had salespeople anywhere near your data, it's an important thing to make sure that sort of notes and comments and, information that's been collected over an extended period of time is sanitized before, it's used to either activate communications or you start to create sort of self-service profile areas and things like that where somebody's ticked as being interested in something and has never opted into that. So I think it's an important thing to do it first.
In terms of, absolutely, I would certainly second that. I mean, there are, looking at it from a perspective of, being absolutely clear as to what it is that we have at the moment, you may decide certainly in a very controlled way to clean up data post-migration. But it's got to be controlled. And a lot of the time it's like, oh, we'll sort that out later. And nobody ever does. Yeah. So making sure that you've got that framework in terms of what are the data sources, who's involved, how are we going to manage this both as part of the implementation and going forward, just allows you to be completely clear as to who's responsible, when things are going to happen, and what those data sources are going to look like. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the time 360 view is kind of almost what forces bad data, because what happens is everybody wants to put everything in, so they have a complete picture, and what they end up with is a very muddled picture.
Yeah, of course. Okay, excellent. And so I've got a couple of questions here about the length, the age of data. So one was asked, how long should we keep event or attendance and financial data if it's no longer in use? And the next question is about the value and the need for entity-specific data and retention policy CRM, and they're struggling with data age too. So we'll ask that one second. But around the first point, how long should somebody keep events or attendance or even financial data if it's no longer in use?
It's quite a tough one, because it's got to be appropriate to the organisation and their needs. We've engaged with a number of organisations where professional membership organisations, you could almost call them lifetime membership organisations, where they're kind of a member will join and essentially will not leave, because it's very much part of their profession. Yeah. So having their progression, having that data across a number of years, which might seem strange to some, a couple of decades worth potentially, is very appropriate for another organisation. So it just
for charities, for example, supporting information. We all have our charities that we might actually have been supporting since, I don't know, let's say I'm a big supporter of Shelter, for example, and I've been supporting them since I was 18 years old. So you were talking about my financial data. I give them 50 quid a year, maybe 50 quid a year, 100 quid a year, whatever. So from going on your slides, Alex, in terms of stepping up and actually engaging with me, and what you're talking about, Marius, the age of that financial data.
Well, there's regulatory requirements with regard to keeping financial information and transactional information. I forget what it is, and I can defer that to Marius in terms of the detail. But in terms of keeping information, because from a regulation standpoint, you're required to do so. But I think there's obviously, the more data you have, the more expensive it is to keep, the more complicated it becomes to process. So I would say that there's no sort of one size fits all answer, but I suppose don't keep data that you're not going to do anything with. The temptation is to sort of capture every little bit of activity. We see this a lot with CRM implementations where we're sort of taking them over, where every download on a site has been pushed into CRM as an activity, which is just utterly pointless. All you're really seeing is the fact that the members are downloading your documents. So I think it's not just about quantities; it's also about the appropriateness of where you're storing the information. So, for example, signal information or download information you might store at the sort of micro level within Google Analytics or Matomo or Piwik or some kind of analytics platform, but you might then sort of aggregate out some meaning and then store that meaning data back within CRM. So I suppose it's not a one size fits all answer, really.
Okay, Anything to add, Marius?
No, I think you've covered that.
Excellent. Okay, so I mentioned about other some struggling with quality, age quality of data. How highly do you value the need for entity-specific data retention policy, the CRM? Because they're struggling with data quality, but age too. So retention policy for CRM.
So it was, so I think the question related to sort of entity specific. So I think it's the same. I mean, that's the sort of the technical implementation of how to solve the other question that we were talking about a minute ago, which was the rules around, you know, how long you might store individual types of data. So, I mean, if you look at GDPR, data is meant to go off in the sense of once people have stopped engaging with you or stopped providing you consent, then if you're storing things under consent, you're meant to go back and sort of re-ask for it. So I think it's not a technical thing. It's more a case of, on a case-by-case basis, you know, look for do you need to store it? Do you have a use for storing it? And then once you've sort of worked out why you need to store the data, then you can look at the technical controls of how you solve that problem, whether that's some sort of CRM retention rule on an entity basis, or whether it's a some degree of report and some manual intervention.
Okay, and so we talked about obviously getting a number of different people on board, change management, getting the vision correct. Talking about simplifying data audit as well, and then moving on to personalisation. Now, one question that I always get asked is, how long does a project like this take? Well, you know, that's a very open-ended question, but if we strip it down a little bit, does this project have a typical lifespan? Is it 6 months? Is it 12 months? I know it does depend on organisation, and does it depend between charities and membership organisations?
I can say how long it doesn't take, so which is quite helpful, I know. But I mean, these are substantial projects. You know, to do things well will be ultimately, obviously, it's based on budget, it's based on time, it's based on staff resource availability. You know, we've done projects in as small as 13 weeks. We've also done projects that have taken 2 years. So those are very, very different projects in terms of the scope of their deliverables. But I think it's something Marios said earlier. It's not about just doing the project. It's about sort of going on this journey and sort of, you know, good projects are not finished, I suppose. You know, you're constantly sort of iterating. So I think assume that the project is going to take somewhere between 6 and 12 months. But it's how long's a piece of string, because it really depends where you're starting from. But also things that people, I guess, from an introspective standpoint, don't talk about, which is their kind of, what is their organization's digital maturity? How well versed are they at doing complex projects? You know, do they have a PMO? Do they have you know, significant digital capabilities in house, which means that, you know, they're able to support these kind of projects, you know, much more readily. So I think a starting position is to understand where you are, understand what your own capabilities are, you know, bring in support organizations like Hart that can, you know, augment your team in terms of giving you the sort of supportive structure that you need to deliver a project. And then look at the plan and look at the iteration. So it's too difficult to say, I would say, but these are not things that can be accomplished in weeks typically.
Absolutely. I mean, look, it sounds quite onerous when you look at it, but ultimately you're answering some basic questions, kind of almost what, why, you know, and really your strategy and objectives should kind of give you that, and hopefully they're already in place. Then you're looking at sort of how and who, you know, do we have a sort of a data governance framework? Do we know who owns the data in different areas? Who's responsible for it? Who's the steward for it? And then you can, as I said, some simple mapping exercises around data sources and data quality that will then enable you to kind of like move on and actually move data across or cleanse data. So it shouldn't be onerous, it should be appropriate, and it can be done relatively quickly. But as Alex said, if you want it done properly, you need to account for it being, you know, a reasonable length of time.
Brilliant. Thank you. There's just one last question. So this was like, curious to know which charities you think have done a particularly great job at transforming or disrupting their business through the use of data.
Alex, you or me?
I knew that was coming to me. Well, I mean, I think Twins Trust, which is a mutual client with Blue Light, have done a particularly good job of, you know, I guess in terms of that 360 view, you know, they've been able to use information that they know about the member, the donor, and also, you know, a lot of really interesting data activation from the web platform to be able to sort of drive some really, you know, some really great engagement. I think we can definitely follow up for the questioner with more information on that in terms of how they approach things and on what the results were. There was one other question as well, if we have time for it. I'm looking at Joyce. Which is
pushing your luck.
I know,
really
but
quick, really
okay,
quick. I was
fine.
going to say what we will do is because I know we have had a lot of questions, and we will make sure that we follow up directly with all of them to make sure they all are covered. But I am conscious, unfortunately, I am the bad timekeeper, and I have to stick to time.
Okay.
So just to say thank you very much, gentlemen. That's been really, really interesting to say. There's been some really, really good questions, and we will make sure that we answer all of them. And also to say that the recording and the slides will be available and sent out afterwards. And if there is any other burning questions that you didn't get a chance to put in, please feel free to send them in, and again, we'll make sure we get them answered afterwards. So just to say thank you very much for everybody for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.